ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the TPA annual membership meeting today. My name is Craig Douglas. I am here to support Patrick and the board as we go through this important meeting for the Provider Alliance. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes as usual. We are going to be using the chat function today, so I'm going to be posting some materials that you'll want to take a look at, including minutes from the last meeting and some bios for the slate of board members coming up. And there'll be a few other attachments throughout the day. If you missed the attachment in the chat, don't worry, we'll follow up with that so that you'll have links of all, with all that information after the meeting today, along with a recording of the meeting. We are using the Q&A function as well, so if you have a question, feel free to drop that right in the Q&A or in the chat. And we are going to be using the poll feature today for some voting, so keep an eye on that as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Craig. Thanks to all of you for being here today. We will get started here momentarily with our annual meeting. Very pleased that our president, Ruth Siegfried, here for the final time as president, is going to preside with us. We look forward to chatting with Ruth a little bit. As Craig has already noted, there are the minutes from last year's annual meeting, so we will follow protocol. We conduct these meetings under modern rules of order. However, we do like to do a vote when it comes to voting in the slate of board members. And something new that we've added this year is that, as Craig also noted, we do have bios of our board members. Typically, we've kind of just shown you a list of the names, but we feel there's been really some growth and diversity and some turnover that we really want to highlight and make sure that all of you in membership see our board class that's going in and get to learn a little bit about them, and hopefully can learn more over the course of the next year as well. So I believe Craig has posted everything in there. Please take a look. We will declare a forum based on registrations, and we note that people, as they come into the room, we will also be doing a vote on the actual new business item very shortly. So with no further delay, I want to welcome Ruth Siegfried, President of the Provider Alliance Board.
It is a delight to be here this morning. I used to attend every single meeting of the Provider Alliance, but I've been sort of persona non grata for quite a while, as I've done a lot of other things and have followed the Provider Alliance carefully through the staff of Envision, and of course through Patrick and through my board participation, but not so much attending the big meetings anymore. And I miss that. This morning I wanted to take a few minutes just to reflect on TPA. Many of you have taken on your roles, your current roles, sometime over the course of the last couple of decades and maybe very recently. And you might not really understand where the Provider Alliance came from. So you might think that I'm reminiscing like us old people like to do, because I have now joined the ranks of those gray-haired old folks that I used to make fun of. But it's not just reminiscing, really. This is to remind you and all of us of the themes that have been consistent with the Provider Alliance since its very, very beginnings. And those themes are really advocating, collaborating, and keeping on moving to improve the service system. So the Provider Alliance started in a kind of funny way. Many of you don't know Mike Reardon, but some of you I know do. He and I happened to be at a provider meeting at one of the counties because back in the early 90s, all providers contracted with individual counties in order to be paid and provide the services that we have now. So we went to county meetings to learn about what was going on in the system. And it was quite a different game back then. But Mike and I happened to be working in the same county, and this was the joinder of Washington Green. And we're sitting in a provider meeting and we're listening to people tell us what providers need to do and how providers need to be structured and how providers need to learn from the counties about what should be expected of us. And Mike and I had a few common issues we learned where we were at a little bit of odds with the counties and particularly with this county joinder. So we're listening in the meeting and we both posed a few questions. And those of you who know me or know Mike, you know they're probably kind of hard pointed questions. So we posed a couple of questions and we didn't really get any answers. And at the end of the meeting, or toward the end of the meeting, Mike came over and sat by me and he said, you know, maybe we should form our own association and put some pressure on this county. And I was a little dubious at first, but as we talked about it, my blood went up a little bit. And so we kind of decided that we should do something, invited a couple of other people together with us to create the Provider Alliance. And interestingly enough, I left the meeting. Now, remember, this is before the internet really took off. There was no such thing as emails and websites. So I didn't have a phone number for Mike. And I wanted to touch base with him so we could start planning on this little project we were doing. So I called the county office to get Mike's phone number, and the secretary picked up the phone and I said, hi, this is Ruth Siegfried. And I was trying to reach Mike Reardon, and I wondered if you could give me the phone number for Washington Arc because I don't have it. And she said, why do you want it? And I said, because I need to call Mike. And she said, but why? And I made up an excuse, which actually wasn't totally made up because Arc Washington was referring a client to us at the time. So I told her it was because we needed to collaborate on this person who we were going to be taking for services. But I was appalled that someone at a county office would think I needed an excuse or a reason that she or anyone else there needed to know about in order to call a colleague of mine at another provider organization. But this is how things worked back then. It was the counties owned us as providers, and we were beholden to them. So out of that was born the Provider Alliance, with a real determination that we were going to advocate for ourselves, that we were going to work together, and that we were going to do something to move forward the services that we felt were informed by providers, not informed for providers. So the Provider Alliance became a thing. We worked together, and it actually worked really quickly. The attitude of the county changed dramatically over the course of less than a year, where they started to actually ask us things and where they started to actually respect us as professionals in the field. So that's where we really kind of proved that working together created our own form of advocacy and was very effective. We didn't do a whole lot other than get together for lunch once a month and talk about, whether there were issues we needed to press forward on. But a couple of years later, Ed Piccarini got a group of folks together and wanted to develop as a sort of loose organization to share information and resources, because especially Western Pennsylvania providers, we really felt like we were kind of on an island because we didn't want to have to go to Harrisburg every month for these expensive meetings where we had to go the day before, stay in hotels, leave our organizations, leave our other responsibilities for a couple of days in order to be able to find out what was happening in the state. So Ed had this bright idea to bring providers together and collaborate. So lo and behold, that effort took off, and we offered, because our purposes were so similar between what Mike and I had kind of started and what Ed was doing now, we realized that we could just give the nonprofit entity to Ed so that he could use an incorporated entity for his new effort. So that's where the Provider Alliance really kind of took off. So Ed continued to grow that effort and build support and gain a voice around the state, and was an incredible leader for quite a number of years until I think in 2017, Ed decided to leave the Provider Alliance and go back to the world of provider leadership, where he'd already spent many years before this. And then Patrick D'Amico, who had also done his duty as a provider executive, stepped forward and took on the Provider Alliance to keep us moving again forward in the development of this service system. So again, exponential growth in the Provider Alliance in these last few years. We've grown not only in size, but also in influence. And eventually we formed the leadership really, and continue to be the leaders in creating and continuing this unified group of provider associations that you all know today as a pretty important way of advocating through our collaboration with other provider associations as well. So I would say TPA has been very effective in evolving as an organization and keeping with the theme of moving forward all the time. So as I'm pursuing my retirement, which is why I made sure I dressed casually for today, that's not a hard thing for me. I'm pursuing my retirement from the leadership of Envision. Most of you probably know that at the end of December of 2024, I turned over the leadership to Kim Love, who has been alongside me for well over 25 years in the leadership of Envision. And I'm off pursuing other exciting adventures, never stopping moving, just like the Provider Alliance. But in 2025, we have only a couple of the original board members that came on since the bylaws changes in 2017. So I can't even keep dates straight. Besides me are Sue Lautenbacher and Will Stennett, continuing in roles of in the past year of board membership. And Sue and will continue on next year, as you can see that they are on the slate. Patrick and the board have really worked diligently over the last years to continually increase the membership on the board. And we've had a very deliberate effort to diversify the board, to ensure that the board represents our members, and to solicit other leaders' interest in membership on the board. So you will notice my absence for the first time on the slate in front of you for the slate of board members, but some new faces to continue the growth of the Provider Alliance. Still with a focus though, on advocacy, on collaboration, and on moving us forward. And I think it's very interesting to see that those three themes have continued since those early 1990s days, when Mike and I sat in a provider meeting, frustrated that we were not heard and that we weren't respected in the provider world. I would say that we, meaning all of you sitting here and all of those who came before you, have really created a very impressive collaborative group that is representative of the providers in the state of Pennsylvania and beyond, and that will continue to move our system forward in the days to come. So furthering the mission that we all have to make the world a better place for people with intellectual disability and autism. So before you, you have the slate of the board for 2025 to 2026. And you will notice that the bios were sent to you in the meeting materials. So I think there might be a link in the chat also to get you back there if you need it. But today I'd like to present the board class of 2025-2026 for voting. And if we could get a motion to approve this board class, this slate, I would appreciate someone stepping forward and providing that motion. Steve Surovic, I appreciate that you made the motion. Do we have a second?
I see Karen Scanlon has raised her hand. So
Thanks, Karen.
Karen's
And Oren seconded the second too. Thanks, both of you, all three of you, really. And Patrick, I'm going to turn it to you to hold the voting poll open.
Thank you, Ruth. We will open the polls now. You see the slate before you. We will call out Walter Ware will be joining the board for the first time, pending approval of the board slate. So I want to thank all the board members for their dedication of time, particularly Ruth. I want to acknowledge the many, many years we've worked together, all of your support over these many years. And I remind myself, you and I go back to, we predate the Provider Alliance actually in our relationship with one another. So that tells us a lot. I don't know what it says to the rest of the membership, but like you, I want to thank and acknowledge Ed Piccarini. One of the things those bylaws actually did as well in 2017, which opened up the Provider Alliance, which would have been only providers to supports coordination to county entities and county administrations with the evolution of the system. And we had really, by that time, established a real presence in our influence with government, looking at rates and the geographic area maps and things like that, that TPA was very involved and instrumental in at that time. So as you said, Ruth, going from influencing one joinder in Pennsylvania to now the work of this great board and this great membership, we're going to talk a lot about some of the pending things going on in that very arena. So thank you, Ruth. Thanks for being here today. So we can, Craig, your discretion when we feel we've sort of exhausted the polling, and we can then display results and then finalize this new business item. So hopefully everybody can see results. Looks like we do have 100% of those voting have approved the slate. So I'll hand it back to you by way of congratulating them as well, Ruth. I know you want to.
Congratulations to all of you, and best of luck. Anything I can do to support you, I definitely would do that. I'm going to be happy to watch the work going forward.
So I think we can go to probably next slide and good of the order if there's anything that any members would like to raise. I would just like to take a moment, Ruth, to say that when we went through this process last year at our annual meeting, I did receive feedback both during and after the meeting. We had some conversations. I know, Ruth, you and I had those conversations. We brought those conversations to the board around things such as transparency, the process, which I think we tended to kind of wait too long in the year. And Sue Lautenbacher's with us today as well on the board. Ruth, you've certainly been there for the entire tenure of the bylaw governance structure. And I think we really took to heart, my own opinion, some of the recommendations, some of the very constructive critique. And I think we did open it up. And I think Walter was an example of that, someone who heard some of the discussion, wanted to be a participant. We want to make sure that you feel that if you are interested in serving, if there's any reason at all that you would like to become a part of this board, I am proud to say we expanded it to the maximum number allowable under our bylaws. And we started off really kind of small. We started at 5. We've grown the board. We've diversified the board. I think we represent regions from all across the state. I think we have small, large, rural, not so rural, all different services. So I think across the board, it's been a great process. I think it's led to an excellent result, but I also want to let you as members know we are always open to anything that can make this better. And we certainly heard that last year. And I do think that we've enacted some changes. I do think there's more to be done on that front too, as far as the transparency of governance, because it's really you as members, despite the change from going to this governance structure to where we were as a membership organization. It really is all about making sure that we are serving the needs of the full membership. And one of the ways we're happy that we can do that is through a very active board. So sorry, Ruth, to take so much time there. I did want to reflect on those comments, and we'll certainly leave it up to you to see if there's any other comments this year that we might apply into the upcoming year.
So anything else for the good of the order today?
Ruth, I would just like to say thank you for all that you have done, that wonderful history, that you rolled out for us and the strength that you're leaving the organization in. So thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I'm really proud of all of you. All right, thank you all very much. And this brings the annual meeting to a close. Motion to adjourn. All right, and Patrick, I think you have some other business of the day.
We definitely do, Ruth. So we'll adjourn the meeting officially. But before you leave us, Ruth, is there anything that you want to talk about that you're doing? And because we know you haven't formally retired, and we can go to the next slide, Craig. We might as well keep that up there because that's where we want to go next, and we'll leave this up here as long as we can. But before you go, Ruth, if you have a few minutes, just if there's anything that you want to share that you are working on that might have some relevance to our continued work together, because we know you're going to remain active in the field.
Well, yeah, some of us just never know how to retire, and I'm not the only one. Joining me in some of my efforts are a couple of other so-called retirees. So I'll tell you a little bit about the two things that I'm doing. So for this year and next year, I'll continue in a role with Envision called the founding president role. And that is a role that is really designed to ensure continuity of leadership, but also for me to support the new president and CEO, who is Kim Love, and to support the board of Envision. And so I have a couple of projects that the board has asked me to perform and that Kim and I are in agreement on. And I'll be working on those over the next 18 more months. And one of those is to serve as the chair of William Penn Human Services. Many of you know about William Penn Human Services, and others of you may be new to or have only maybe heard the words, but not really know what we're doing. And that's really taking up a significant amount of my time and effort, but it is really an effort to develop a community supported care model, which uses the ACAP program as its pilot. So we use the same funding model that the ACAP program used or has used for, I think, 14 years or somewhere in that neighborhood in the state of Pennsylvania. It is a specialized form of managed care specifically designed for people with intellectual disability and autism. And I'm very excited about the possibilities for the development of this new model that I do believe could be the future of IDA services in Pennsylvania, and probably even beyond, as there are other states very interested in what we've been doing. So I know you'll hear more about this over the coming year or so. So don't be surprised if you see me pop up on a screen somewhere or in a presentation someplace talking about William Penn Human Services and about how you all can be participants and can join us in developing and creating really a very new and dynamic way to provide services for people with intellectual disability and autism. Meanwhile, continue moving forward with the Provider Alliance. I'll be back and talking to you more about how you can continue that forward movement that we've been engaging in for 30 years now, maybe a little more. So thanks, Patrick.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Have a great day. Great to see you as always. And we will now continue with our meeting. Greatly appreciate all your efforts and years of service to TPA.
Thank you. It is one of the things I am most proud of is the evolution of this organization. Thanks.
I as well. I know you speak for many, so thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. And with that, I'll mention Sue is with us today. And Sue, the next board meeting will actually be July 15th. Board members have been alerted to that. In this transition year, Sue has actually been identified as, I will say, president-elect or maybe even president. This has been a transitional period. The bylaws do indicate that the formal vote is taken at the first meeting of the board of directors. So as in past years, we haven't always gotten the bylaws right because I'll call them out as relatively new still. I know that's not fully accurate, but I think we learn as we go. I think we are tightening things down per the bylaws as written. We will have a meeting then to actually vote in our officers of the board. That is the formal process that we'll go through on the 15th. Glad we will be assembling a board meeting, and you board members, as noted, will receive your invitations, and this will be Walter's very first board meeting. So we look forward to getting onto the work of the board, but I did want to acknowledge also, Sue, you're expected becoming of the president of the TPA board and your many years of service here on this board as well to be acknowledged also today. With that, I'd like to turn briefly to the upcoming conference. Our next meeting will actually be live. If you've been with us for a little while now, I'm very excited to talk for a few moments. And I'd like to bring in Craig, and I'd like to bring in Chad Hilliard, who've been really instrumental in working on the conference. I want to, first of all, thank all of the sponsors that you see listed. It's really the sponsors and their generosity that enable us to keep this as a free benefit to TPA members. So we do charge for people who are not in membership. And we always get several people who do come to the conference. But we also have kept this free. And the venue, if you've been there, is a great venue. We feed you breakfast, lunch. There's a lot of activity. And one of the fortunate things about having Kristen Aaron's come out to this meeting, which she's agreed to do at least the last 3 years, if not 4 years. I think we've been doing this for now a 4th year. We really get Kristen and OEP leadership for the full day. So if you're able to attend in person, it's really something that we encourage. There's a lot of informal opportunities to sit down over lunch and in between sessions. And that's something that we think is a real benefit. We understand if you can't travel to do the conference live in person, we will stream via a Zoom webinar all of the individual panel discussions and the keynote, so you can still be where you are, wherever you're going to be on that particular day. But I'm just very, again, excited to host this, to have a true networking session, to provide that opportunity for members. We work with other entities such as Representative Miller's Disability Summit, much broader representation of the disability community, but here it's members and people in our community. So really a good opportunity for the TPA community to come together and share the resources and learn some information. And I was speaking yesterday with Dr. Sherpas. He's going to attend. We're going to take a dive into technology on a couple of different fronts. We've had some listening sessions with parents and family members. They are going to be on a problem solving solutions type of panel to close the day. Kristen, family members, leadership in the provider world, industry leaders, thought leaders in technology. So stay tuned as the program continues to unfold and develop. We do encourage you to register, and we've opened some more tickets because we were on the cusp of being sold out already. So we're going to try to get as many people in as possible. So Craig, if I could start with you, and then Chad as well. I know you've been helping to organize. I want to acknowledge really the theme and everything that you've seen thus far, a lot of Craig's input and vision in terms of how we really want to come together as a community. And we're really trying to build this out in a constructive way. So Craig, first of all, thank you. And if there's anything you'd like to add here, I want to give you a couple of minutes to talk about the upcoming conference.
Nothing really. I'm just anxious to see everybody. I think it's really going to be a super day. We're working on final details and hammering things out. But again, I'd echo what Patrick said. We're super grateful for everybody who has sponsored and stepped up to help us make this possible. So thanks everyone. Looking forward to seeing you at the end of next month.
Thanks, Craig. And I think we actually added another sponsor. We made some room for somebody who said they wanted to sponsor us. We may be able to add a couple more exhibit tables. We've sold those out as well. So we'll keep in touch with everybody in terms of tickets. And then Chad, I want to thank you. First of all, Chad had worked with Center for Healthcare Solutions, previously Healthcare Council of Western Pennsylvania. That's how we really got introduced to Chad. And his work's really been instrumental in a lot of the sponsorship opportunities. If you're participating in the Altius Leadership Series, that's a relationship Chad had. We were able to offer that to our members. Chad's helped to bring in some people that are new members for us on the associate member side that we're doing some supportive work with Center for Healthcare Solutions. And Chad has a real skill and interest in doing this type of work. So I'll mention that one of the ways that we keep everything lean here at TPA is really engaging what we need. So Chad, I want to promote you as well for people who do events. You do a great job for us. to the extent you're available. I think you've expressed to me that you could help other members out. So just something to bear in mind. We will always share resources that benefit TPA to make sure they benefit you and your organization as well. But again, I'll start with a thank you, Chad. Thanks for all the work in putting this together. We're about a month out now, so likewise, I'll give you a minute to sort of call out anything that you would like to tell our members.
And Patrick, first, I'd just like to thank you and the team for allowing me to be a part of this. And I'm sure you can hear my dog barking in the background there, so I apologize. But yeah, I'm just thankful to be part of the team and just bring what my skill set to, to make this event larger. I mean, I don't want to say make it better, but just make it larger and have more so of a variety of participants as far as on the sponsorship side that are sharing services that are certainly beneficial to your audience. So I'm excited to be part of this my first conference. I actually participated as a vendor, obviously with Center for Healthcare Solutions. So I'm excited to enjoy the day. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Looking forward to a great day. If you have questions, let us know. Spread the word. Again, free for TPA members, which we're happy to be able to continue. And I'll end where I started here by thanking our sponsors that enable us to do that. So with that, we'll go to our topics for today. I want to probably welcome in right now David Caligiuri. We've asked David to join us because of both news at the federal and state levels in terms of budget. What we are going to go through today, some federal and state budget news. Legislation, I think we have some breaking news in terms of having bipartisan co-sponsorship of a market index bill in the Pennsylvania House. We want to talk a little bit about that. We want to revisit PA Senate Bill 657 that was looking to eliminate some existing regulation, particularly as it would affect and does affect facility sizes and the number of people who can be served together. We want to talk a little bit in that context about the forthcoming CPS work group that is being reassembled by ODP. So we'll provide some update on that. And we also want to wrap up with a little bit on performance-based contracting. Obviously, for supports coordination, we are still in the aftermath of the comment period. So we'll provide some updates there as well. But we really have a lot to dig into. So David, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So maybe we'll start high level. I know if for those who are Anchor members, and Craig does a great job curating content from Anchor. I know Fridays, government affairs meeting, Anchor put some things out. Really, reconciliation at the federal level still happening, still big numbers. We know that's intricately related to state budget, of course. So David, anything at all from your perspective, federal as it affects state and what our lawmakers are doing in Pennsylvania right now?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, the federal budget, as it relates to some of the Medicaid cuts that are being proposed, is going to have a significant impact on our state budget. And there's a discussion as to whether or not we wait and see what happens with the federal government, or do we just move forward and balance our own budget? And unfortunately, on the state side, they're still a few $billion apart on a $47 billion budget. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot of money, as we all know. And so they are adjourned for this week. They'll go back in session next week, which means they'll probably miss the June 30th deadline of having the budget balanced. So that'll probably leak into the middle of July before we have a budget at the state as well. And from what I'm hearing at the federal level, it seems like that's not gonna, I think the president set a July 4th deadline. Not sure if they're gonna be able to hit that as well. So not surprising that we're back in this position. But here we are yet again, in, the heat of the summer, trying to agree on a budget.
Yeah, thanks, David. Let me circle back and ask you the effect on our lawmakers, sort of individually or collectively. We know at the end of the day, it comes down to a small group of leadership who decides what to do in Pennsylvania, correct? So, but individually, is there any sense of a preference if Pennsylvania feels it's more prudent to see what the feds do and that just saying we should wait versus we really, maybe it's constitutionally they need to do something. But I know it'll fall probably based on what leadership agrees to do, but any sense about what you're hearing is the most prudent approach?
Well, generally speaking, they want to just pass their own budget, regardless of what the federal government does, because those cuts, as impactful as they will be, really will not hit us until next year. So we can balance the budget and move forward without you know without waiting too long on the federal government. I will say, the problem that we face here in Pennsylvania, like everyone else, is, where's the revenue coming from? And, mass transit is a huge issue. We need to figure out a way to fund mass transit. And they're sort of relying upon skill games. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but in a lot of the convenience stores around Pennsylvania, you'll see slot machines. Those slot machines are unregulated right now. So anyone can play them at any age. They are not taxed. And the state looks at that as a huge revenue generator that can help fund mass transit and a whole slew of other programs. But that is probably the biggest sticking point right now in Harrisburg.
Okay, thanks, David. So with that, and I'll just remind everybody that, of course, in our world, with the Medicaid waivers, so much of the money comes from the federal government. And local reporting indicates, you look at the size of the human services budget, it's a substantial portion of the $47 billion budget. When you look at a percentage, we show a lot of pie charts over time, but federal money is very influential. It's more than half of what goes into the waivers in terms of our world, in terms of IDA. So it will be influential. We will certainly watch and continue to stay vigilant about what happens at the federal level. We'll see if they meet that July 4th deadline. And we'll also then hopefully soon thereafter start to get a little bit more of the state's response as to how they may cope with that. I know we hear a lot about people who will lose health insurance is often a top line thing that is looked at. But of course, our concerns would also be here, the funding that goes into our services. So we'll continue to keep everybody informed there. So thanks, David, for the high level look at both state and national. We'll stay tuned in terms of what the state does, if anything, to meet its deadline for a partial type of budget. And do you think, David, last question, is it likely to just pass something interim to get something done versus a full budget? Or do you care to comment on that at all, just to sort of keep the lights on, so to speak?
No, that's a great point. And there's been a lot of talk about just doing a bare bones budget that does just what you said, keep the lights on, but doesn't really address some of the bigger problems, such, whether it's mass transit, whether it's the Medicaid waivers, whatever it may be. But I think it's really tough to say, Patrick, as we get closer to the deadline, and that deadline is Monday. I can tell you that leadership and their staff, they were working through the weekend to try to come up with some agreement. They'll most likely not hit that deadline, like I said, and this will extend to probably the second or third week in July. It could go either way. It really could. I think, obviously they want to get a balanced budget that, pays for everything and addresses all the issues. But sometimes, unfortunately, that's just not practical. So you resort to just a bare bones budget that keeps the lights on.
Okay, well, let's go into kind of the news of the day. And Sue, I know you're here, so I want to welcome you at any point to sort of comment on these things. I know, Sue, we'd ask you to really participate because of the CPS work group today, but long before we get to that, we're going to take a deep dive here into the next topic, if you can advance, Craig. This is just going back really a few months ago, April 11th. The Senate introduced a bipartisan bill, Senate Bill 617, as you see on the screen. I think we have that ready to drop into chat. If you can do that, please, Craig, so people want to take a full look at it. So the next slide will show you really the pertinent information, the various lines from that particular bill that really address market index. So if you take a look at that, if you could, thanks, Craig. For the 12-month period beginning July 1, 2025, and each July 1 thereafter, the annual fee schedule rates for direct support professionals who care for individuals with intellectual disability or autism shall be increased by the percentage change, if any, in the consumer price index, and on and on and on. So we've always known the wording of this has been direct toward direct support professionals. There really isn't a particular fee for direct support professionals. However, by and large, every service relies upon direct support professionals. So we have taken and interpreted this language to mean, and we've been involved in it over the course of the past several years, to be understood that this affects the fee schedule rates. So rather than an every 3 year per regulation, this effort has been to make sure that our rates are adjusted annually. And we've been able to advance that conversation. And I'll turn to you just for a moment, Sue, because I say that it occurs to me, this is probably 5 years into this process. And I can remember being relatively new in my position and role here, thinking, wow, what a breakthrough. And we have this bill and this is going to happen. And people educated me, this is a long game, this is a long process. I'm sure I was very much put into a state of despair. I didn't want to wait 5 years, but 5 years and I feel that we have made progress and I feel we're on the cusp of something. So I'll just ask you for a moment, Sue. I know you've been involved with this from the very outset. And I know you're one of the people I learned from. This takes some time to do. So if you can comment on that for a moment, Sue, I'd appreciate it.
Well, Patrick, I can honestly say the movement you've done in 5 years, from my background, amazes me. And in fact, I was a little reticent when we kept moving forward, earlier this year with all the upheaval. And I thought, well, maybe we should back burner this. And yet you didn't. You wisely didn't. And I've got to say, I am so thrilled that you did not, that we as a group have made the movement, and that all of the different organizations have come together so beautifully to support this. And I know when you started this out, Patrick, many of those very same organizations, as you know, LARC belongs to more than one, were very they didn't think it was going to happen. They kind of thought you were a little pie in the sky. And now to have them all having joined in and seen the wisdom to this approach has been pretty amazing as well. And the fact that the movement that we've made, and I agree with you, I really think we are on the cusp of reaching and attaining this goal. So it's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you,
Hey,
Sue. And
Patrick, if I
obviously,
could I
go
just
ahead.
cut and
We're
just
certainly not there
to
yet, but I agree. But go ahead, David.
no, just wanted to agree with what Sue says. And I can tell you just from talking to all the legislators, they see the collaboration and they see that, and it makes such a huge difference. And I think it's why we have bipartisan support and why we're going to continue to grow that bipartisan support on all this legislation. And I know it's a long road and it's been a long time, but it is working. And so that does make a difference. So yes, definitely kudos to you.
Yeah, thank you. And again, members have driven this. We've been asking for your support of this for many, many years. This really grew from, we used to do a poll every year of what were the advocacy priorities, what should we be focusing on? And this always came up. I was going to say top three, it was always one or two. And no matter how people felt about the likelihood of us being able to accomplish it, it was something that people said they wanted and we needed. And I think that's always remained true. And I think that's why we've gradually gained this ground. And I think working together has been exactly what's gotten us this far. And this is far from done, but we're going to talk a little bit about where we think we are today, realistically. And I'll just say it's farther than we've been at any point in the past. So you can see the language there. And I also thought it was timely because we've talked about it, as I just said, 5 years in the making. We realize that we kind of stay focused on this and know the details, but we don't always bring that out in meetings like this. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but I question whether or not we shouldn't just do a brief review. So next slide is really something that's not old. We looked at this data when we had workforce studies. We showed members this a few months ago. So we had a workforce study that got released the beginning of this year. So we had this data point. We then knew that our 2024 DSP data, you can see up in the top corner, that the average DSP wage had gone up to $17.85 an hour. And if you go back just a few years, that was up from $14.38. These are all studies that many of you participated in. Many of these are from joint studies among all of the associations. In fact, I think every one of these data points comes from one of those studies. So, I won't kind of get into the boring aspects of charts and graphs, but essentially you can see inflation is what it is. The rates lag behind inflation. Somehow, and I'm not surprised by this, provider organizations and employers manage to outstrip that because in order to have staff, you have to pay what staff are required to do this sometimes very difficult work. And we baselined off of 2021. But if you think back, pandemic related inflation in 20 and 21, the numbers that kind of got us to this baseline, inflation was 13.5% in those couple of years. So that's aberrant. That was largely driven by the pandemic and many other factors which the pandemic affected. But that's what sort of caused some fear, maybe set us back a little bit. Well, we can't be promising you 13.5%, but historically and typically, inflation goes up a few ticks a year. In 2024, for instance, it was 2.9% by the measure that's in the bill. So we wanted to show you this. And then to the point that's already been raised here a couple of times, if you can go next slide, Craig, we have really effectively worked. You again see the associations that we work with, the provider associations, and I will call out in that group as well, but separately, the ARC of Pennsylvania, because not every ARC chapter has a provider organization, or there's not a provider member in a lot of the ARC chapters. So they as well represent an expansion of our base, part of the provider community certainly, but this represents so many organizations across the state, so many of us working together. And this is a document that we issued jointly in April. And certainly we were looking to support the investment of the governor in his proposed budget, the retention of $175 million to support the people who have already been placed into waivers, support the new waivers, supporting people from the waiting list, and for people who adopted services in the prior fiscal year, and bipartisan support for annual market index legislation. And I can't remember at this time if we had, what we did, we put it in. It was actually happening as we were working on this. So Senate Bill 617 is actually in the bullet point. So we were able to add that as this was being drafted. And targeting system simplification, this really gets to something we're going to talk about after market index that I think we're also making some progress on, and it's another elevated issue. But let's move to the next slide, please, Craig. And something that was just released in June, we're talking all kind of recent information here. There's a Senate bill, which is bipartisan. There's the associations working together, publicly supporting a market index bill for the first time. And if you can drop this report, or at least the summary of it, Craig, into the chat, I've highlighted just a few pieces here. Nancy Murray, who chairs our Government Advocacy Committee, has called this out ever since it's been released. We want to get it out to members. We think it's a key part of the advocacy. It's just a 2-page report. And you can see here, only issued, released on June the 11th. This is a bipartisan committee of the General Assembly, a joint committee, I should say more formally. You can see, the basic preamble to this. And these are bullet points 3, 4, and 5. I invite you to look at the entire document as a commercial for direct support professionals, workforce, using data appropriately, the state collecting its own data, market index, as you see here. The General Assembly should consider requiring an annual inflation adjustment to the HCBS state-directed rates, including a required amount that must go directly to direct care workers. That's a separate issue, but you can see market index legislation in this governmental report issued this month at a time when we expect to have bipartisan legislation also introduced in the Pennsylvania House. So we think this is all important. Again, the General Assembly should work with DHS, long-term living, including rate increases that periodically adjust for inflation and other market conditions. The Department of Human Services should consider changing its regulation to require a periodic review of the Office of Long-Term Living's home and community-based service rates. That's an issue. And we believe, and we've heard, that the success we've had with the ODP rates had caused other branches to look at what they could do likewise to help their workforce. But this is kind of a perfect storm for this governmental report. The audience of this report is the General Assembly. Of course, it's public. Well, we can use it as well. And as we kind of advance into the next sort of couple of slides and sort of our ask to sort of continue to rally members, interested stakeholders, of course, all the associations working together on this, we really think we could advance this to the point where it becomes law. So with that, again, take a look at the report. There's a full report that we'll make sure we post to the site, very lengthy. In 2 pages, you can really get the highlights and see how pertinent they are to direct support professionals, workforce, capacity, and particularly to a market index that's referenced several occasions just on the 2-page handout. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We actually did invite Representatives Ortite and Benham to join us today, and they were unable to, of course, not in session, but in the throes of a lot of work in government and the budget not being completed yet. So David, I'll turn back to you. I know you extended those invitations. I think I recall that they're more than willing to chat with us at some point, but I'll let you speak to it.
Well, yeah, no, they're both very excited about the legislation. And again, this is bipartisan support, which is great to see. It's just, they're getting tangled up in the budget mess that's going on right now. So both Jess Benham and Jason Ortita said they'd be happy to speak to the membership once the budget has been resolved at the next meeting.
So we knew that we had Representative Benham. Representative Benham actually served on the Isaac before she ran for the House. So she's very familiar with IDA, with our work, of course, personally, and her representation as an advocate and now as a lawmaker. So she is south of Pittsburgh. I think Carrick is her, well, at least one
Carrick.
of her district offices. David, Nancy, and I had met her in that office fairly recently. With the departure from the House of Representative Dan Miller as he's running for judge, we really wanted to work with somebody, and we worked with Representative Miller. Obviously, Representative Benham came to the forefront immediately, someone we thought of that we knew was supportive to these issues, understood exactly what we were asking for, we knew was very supportive. So we've known for a while that Representative Benham was willing to introduce this legislation. What we were waiting for was the opportunity to make sure that we had a Republican co-sponsor. So Nancy, David, and I had been coordinating meetings. I want to say and acknowledge that we know our colleagues at the other associations. When we meet regularly. We likewise look at those items on the handout with our joint logos and branding representing what you said, David. It matters that they're hearing us in a unified way in the General Assembly when we meet with legislators. So we really felt it was important, being that there was already a Senate bill that was bipartisan, that we wanted to come out of the gates bipartisan here as well. So we have already also met with Representative James Struzzi, Representative Eric Nelson. I feel like I'm missing somebody else who was engaged with us. Obviously, Representative Ortite was very, very interested, and we made the direct ask, would he co-sponsor? And I will say, I have firsthand heard two sitting House members, Republicans, make this comment, well, that's how we get paid. And if I recall correctly, it was actually Representative McCurry who said this publicly during testimony at Representative Dan Miller's summit a couple of years ago, which kind of caused us to reach out to him. That was a powerful statement. And I think, again, sometimes these efforts build very slowly and have to build momentum. But this is not yet real. I want to emphasize the two representatives pictured here are working together. Nancy has circled back to Representative Benham. They had already met. Representative Ortite, the day we spoke with him, said he would go find Representative Benham. They would go discuss this. They've apparently done that. David, I see you nodding your heads. It sounds like you're aware that's happened. So they are talking, and Representative Benham's last message back to us was, we're working on the co-sponsorship memo now. So that is great progress in and of itself. So we're talking about District 36, I believe, for Representative Benham, 46, I believe, for Representative Ortite. We've alerted the other associations. We know they're having conversations. So if you go next slide, I want to just make a comment. When you kind of look at the politics here, and both David and Sue, you may want to comment on this, but Doyle Heffley, just a year ago, yesterday, we were in the Rotunda doing a press conference with the other associations, and side by side, Representative Stephen Kinsey and Representative Heffley, co-chairs then of this House Human Services Committee, were strongly advocating for the IDA community. Stephen Kinsey had then stepped down, left government. There was a period of time where there was not a chair, so it was becoming increasingly difficult, and we were getting at the end of the legislative session. So we want to position basically kind of how to get this into law. So David, I'll stop there. I think just like talking about the issue, it's kind of important now to talk about, so how does this really move from having two bipartisan bills, one in each chamber, to actually becoming law? It sounds real nice to make this progress, but talk through the next steps with us so that we all understand.
Sure. Well, we're waiting on the co-sponsorship memo to be sent out to all the members of the legislature. Hopefully, we'll get more sign-ons as well, and we'll keep it bipartisan. It's going to need a House bill number, and then it'll probably be put into the House Human Services Committee. And in which case, again, this is not going to happen in the next couple of weeks as we resolve the budget. This will be an ongoing process that we'll try to get passed in this legislative session, which will end at the end of 2026. So we've got our work cut out for us. It's a long process. It'll have to get out of committee, go onto the House floor, pass the House floor, and ideally we'll be able to reconcile both a House and Senate bill, and then off to the governor's desk for his signature.
So David, can you talk for a moment about, there are two bills. How does the reconciliation process work? Can it come out of one chamber to get to the floor? What's a typical process? What should we expect and what should we try to work toward here?
Well, so it's very interesting. In this case, we have two different chambers that are led by one, the House is led by the Democrats, the Senate is led by the Republicans. So ideally, what we'll have is they'll come together and they'll have one bill. It'll probably be a Senate bill, and that'll need to pass both chambers. And then it'll go to the governor's desk.
Okay. And what I've shown here, just because this will be relevant a little bit when we briefly circle back to Senate Bill 657 as well. But you see Representative Benham. So Democrats are in control. They're in the majority in the House. So there's an advantage there. Representative Benham can request a hearing on basically her own bill, correct, with Representative Ortite. And we would expect the chair to be able to accept that request. Is that
correct?
Logical? Okay. Okay,
Well,
so
nothing's
there are
logical.
other members. I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
I said nothing's logical in Harrisburg, but yes, that's the process.
Yeah, so I invite you to go to the site because to the extent there are Republicans and Democrats, one of our expectations is, and why we want to talk about this so much today, is this co-sponsorship memorandum will be a request to legislators to sign on to this legislation. So to the extent that you are located and you are a constituent of any House or House member, which of course you are, we want to make sure that they hear from you, that they know that it's important, because in this age, bipartisan tends to mean we have at least one Republican. That's literally the Senate bill. We're very grateful for Senator Pennycook that she has signed on to that bill and made it bipartisan. We feel there's a real opportunity here based on the Republican House members we have spoken with, that we can get multiple people signing on from both sides of the aisle. We don't think it's as big of a challenge, of course, from the Democrats. They have largely been supported. If you go back to the beginnings of this, when we had a House bill, we had no Republicans on some of this legislation, and that does not bode well for the actual passage of this legislation. So part of what we want to do is call this out in advance. We will stay in tune with Representatives Ortite and Benham of when this memo will be issued. We don't always know that or see that. It's firms and people like David who helped call that out. The Senate bill, for instance, we were not aware something had been issued. So coordinating in advance, being able to advise you in advance so you can reach out with the right information, such as the Joint Committee report that we just showed you, any other details that can help you support it, but most importantly, support it as a constituent. The more people that sign on, I think the more weight that brings to it being heard, both at the committee level, and then if it is approved at committee, which the votes would be here in this committee, to bring it on to the House floor. So, David, correct assessment?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so go ahead.
No, I can't express enough how important it is for those folks. If you have a relationship with these members, please reach out. If not, still reach out, send a letter, make a phone call. It'll make a difference.
Thanks, David. Agreed. And we will get all this collateral on our ACT page to make sure it's available to you. If you have questions, reach out to us. And I just want to emphasize that this is real. We've talked about this for many years. Many of you have been voting. Yeah, this is important. Even if you thought it would never happen, you might say, and I believe many did, we'd love to have this. This is dialogue we've been having with the secretary, with the deputy secretary, with the governor's office. We've been alerting them for a long time. I have said to one of my colleagues among the other associations, I think this is the legislative session to get this done, because this governor will sign this legislation. There's often been questions in the past that even if we could advance this through the legislature, would this or that particular governor have signed it? There's some history there as well. And this governor, as much as we may advocate oftentimes for more that is needed, our governor has been very vocal about supporting this community, and that matters too. So we have the administration, we have the people in the Department of Human Services. If we can get individual legislators on board, again, in the aftermath of a report issued earlier this month recommending there should be inflationary adjustment and that we should do away with our regulation and replace it with such, the timing is very good. So this is real. And secondly, your voice will matter to the extent you can reach out to your legislator and say, please co-sponsor this legislation. And particularly if they are Republican, I think that will matter even a bit more. You don't control that. Your legislator is your legislator, but Democratic House member or Republican, we want you to please ask your House member to sign on to this legislation. So we'll give you some ample notice the best we can, and we will keep everybody informed on any progress here. But we're hopeful we'll get this to committee and approved in committee. And with the language you have in the bill, we expect it to be the identical language in the House bill as in the Senate bill we've shared with you today. So, David, any closing thoughts before we move on to other subject matter today?
No, I think we covered a lot today. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free, to reach out directly to me.
Thanks for all you do. Thanks for your support, David. We'll keep everybody apprised as we go along here. David, one other thing, since we're going to go briefly to the Senate Bill 657, I just want to cover that. If you can hang on for just a second, because I know you were kind of briefed on this hearing. So briefly, I want to go there. There are some parallels that I want to talk about. And when we met last month, we called this bill out. I expressed our opposition to the bill. I followed through with that with a letter. We'll ask Craig to drop both these things into the chat again. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I will say this, that since this bill came to our attention, and you can see this was introduced on May the 12th. When did it go to committee, David? Like, it's already been to committee. That's how quickly it moved. And to sort of highlight the process here, the chair of the committee introduced the bill, and as you can see here, through Intergovernmental Operations Committee. So that also implies some support of leadership on his party. So there was a strong likelihood this bill was going to go straight to committee, be approved. The majority being in the Senate, this could have been approved on partisan lines, and it could have gone to the floor of the Senate. This could have been enacted by the time we're meeting now. So David, can you call out for us what you learned from what actually transpired at the hearing? So it has basically been tabled, correct? But if you have any details, I wanted to
Well,
ask.
I mean, that's just pretty it. I think, again, this is the power of the association and the effect of the members reaching out and, putting something that was sort of on a fast track on hold. And so that's where it is. And I think that was a great, again, a great testament to your membership and to your leadership in getting this thing.
Yeah, there I want to interrupt you for briefly there, if we can kind of advance through to our letter, read this, because I will say that I certainly learned during this past month that we have many members who were supportive of this bill, and I want to acknowledge that. And I know that one of the main reasons are the pain points of some regulation and things that we have concern over. Sue, you're on our Government Advocacy Committee. There's been open discussion about that. I will stick to, on the grounds upon which we opposed, that I feel there were many flaws in the actual process of trying to get done what I do think some well-minded people were intending to do. I've made this observation myself, and you can see the regulations there, 6100-444, 6100-445. These would relate to size, facility type. These are the exact regulations that this bill wanted to eliminate. My belief and interpretation was, with the understanding it would just go to a default level, or it would open the playing field very immediately to do certain things. I didn't believe that to be accurate. If you go to the next slide, Craig, and then kind of quickly, this was just our letter, but quickly, it says there were the 4 reasons that we really highlighted. Those 4 reasons were things I talked about at last month's meeting. Olmstead, the ADA, and also the settings rule. Those are things that the states have to comply with. They don't stipulate specifics on size and configuration. We were concerned about not having stakeholder participation. We were concerned about not addressing the financial aspects of this through a rate setting process that would support this expansion in a positive way, because of concern, as always, of resources. And I will say throughout the letter, if you get the chance to look at it, underlying the letter throughout is waiting list. And we also wanted to call out efficiency in an environment where there's 100 million state dollars still serving only 435 people, that we're looking at this type of change versus the state's operating 2 state centers at a very high rate of pay. I don't think they would look favorably on any provider for being inefficient with its resources. I think we do have a right and responsibility to call out. We understand the centers are there, they're serving people, they need to do that effectively and appropriately. But at the same time, it's a lot of resources. The 108 million is actually what it is about what it would take to do another cycle of community rate increases at comparable levels from years past. When you look at what it would take, say, for instance, to keep pace with inflation this year at least. And these are state dollars that have been in this system at the state centers for decades. So it's not new money, it's just money we want to keep in the system. So we'll invite you to look at it there as well. But yeah, David, didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to make clear one of the main reasons I wanted to bring this up. I've had this observation, and I've shared this observation with Kristen, something that I did not believe to be born from our membership, from the provider community. Nevertheless, providers were supportive of eliminating these regulations, and I think that says a lot about the concerns. So I'll give you the final word on that, David.
No, I think you said it perfectly, right? I mean, so and again, this is a piece of legislation that has it's a difficult piece of legislation because there are some benefits to it. So, but we were able to address it early on. We sent a letter to Senator Costa's office, and I think that was impactful.
Yeah, I stand behind the letter and the reasonings. That said, it could have passed. I'll be honest, I expected it to go through committee, and this could have been legislation, and we certainly would have pivoted to making it be what it needed to be to address the concerns that we put into the letter. So it still may go forward, and I'll go to the next slide, and we'll kind of move away from this because really, so why is this relevant, you may ask? So I think one of the things that did come from this, because the department was concerned as well with this legislation and what it might do to existing plan and strategy. So we opened a poll this week that really kind of called out a response of the department to this bill pretty early on. The associations got together, discussed our position on this. We then met with Kristen, actually a couple of times. We asked for the meeting with Kristen because we believed it was a good opportunity to say, these are real concerns. We believe there are policy issues. If you reflect back to the handout that we showed earlier, because it was highlighting the market index, it was also highlighting the investment of 175 million in the budget, but there were policy things that we believe the department could do, and we still believe that to be true. So given the power and force of this legislation, we jointly approached Kristen and said pretty much that. This is sort of an example of things that the provider community is frustrated over. We talked about some technical things on CPS. We talked about some of the configurations in community. We talked about some of the rounding policy that providers raise as concern. But as you see here, we kind of teed off this poll by talking about the governor's multi-year growth strategy. Again, this is something the governor has established. The goal is to eliminate the emergency waiting list for adults. So there's some data that we shared from the recent Isaac meeting in our communications over the past week or so. And ODP has announced that it will soon convene a new community participation supports work group, including IDA providers, to review, and the rest of this is kind of directly from Creston's request of us, to review innovative models, determine definitions and requirements for CPS hubs, evaluate the applicability of Chapter 2380 regulations, and explore barriers to CBS service recovery and expansion. So this work group, I believe, is the direct result of the pressure of the bill, the concern over the passage of the bill, and an attempt and opportunity to make some policy changes that would show we don't necessarily need legislative involvement and we don't need to rip up existing regulation. So we'll see where this goes. And with that, I asked Craig to pull some information. Next slide doesn't really go there quite yet. What I actually want to do is show you where some of these numbers come from. If you looked at the Isaac information that we shared, I think Isaac was on June 17th. This is the number. If you look at the top line in orange, 3468, it's a little hard to see. So that is what the state is reporting its waiting list data, emergency adult. And when they talk about the 24% decrease, they're talking about that decline from 4344 at its peak. New waivers were opened, and there's new enrollees, and the data per ODP's information points to the fact that it's now lower. So one of the things that I'd like to get some information on, we're going to open a poll now about the waiting list. And I want to talk through it just briefly. So at the Isaac, one of the questions that was discussed was, to the extent do you really know the waiting list in your county? More importantly, does the state have information about the types of services that those people need? And the response was, well, typically what we see is everybody just checks everything, that they check off residential, they check off non-residential. I'm not familiar with the form, but ODP acknowledged it's probably not very prescriptive. So in other words, if you knew the number of individuals in the county or counties where you serve folks, what they needed, because typically we think in terms of needs groups and needs of individuals, but people get on the emergency waiting list because of age of caregivers. For many other reasons, and in not every instance is it because of the needs of the individual. It could be the needs of a caregiver, someone who's elderly, they're not going to be able to provide support for very much longer. And the reason that I posed the question was really, would it help us? I would think that it would, but I wanted to ask the question, if you knew that you had folks in a county you serve, what would you do with that information? So the final question is kind of, it really wouldn't matter because I've got workforce, I've got other issues, or no, it would matter if I knew there were 45 people in a county that I serve, and half of them were looking for some form of non-res service or a particular form of day or had complex needs. So it's information that the state acknowledges they're not in a good position to provide to us. And of course, that information would only come from us. But in an environment where we're looking at supports coordination, going to performance-based contracting, I certainly at least wanted to ask the question. It was a question I had that I thought it would be interesting to see from membership what your thoughts were on this. So we'll let you answer. We'll release the results. We'll take a look at that, see what any of it means. And with that, Craig, I'll have you go to the next slide. And these are the results of the question. And this is the question that we asked you. And Craig, I'm sorry, can you read that out just because I've got another graphic on top of, okay, there it goes, sorry. The question, we asked if you believe the ODP CPS work group will produce meaningful policy changes enabling CPS providers to serve more people currently enrolled in a waiver program who cannot find services and those currently on the waiting list. And here's what you said. So I always find it interesting when we open these because there are many times, and I think this always, I feel it's a good poll question if I have no idea what the answer is going to be. And in this particular instance, I was pleased to see that more than half of people responding indicated, yes, this can make a difference. This should make a difference. And at this time, I also want to acknowledge we had many providers say they wanted to serve on this committee. The Emergency Planning Committee, likewise, thank you for those who volunteered for either committee. We were able to accommodate everyone who volunteered for the Emergency Planning and Response Work Group, but we had way more people than we had room for. So as I said to you individually, we did submit everybody's name. We did ask Kristen, as I said a month ago when Kristen was able to join us briefly, we'll probably give you more than you're willing to accept. We had over 20 organizations say they wanted to serve on this committee. Sue is going to be one of our representatives on that committee. Sue was one of the volunteers early on. So, and I'm hopeful, I just communicated briefly with Kristen this morning. She feels she'll be able to get at least 3. We were asked to provide 2. So if we can get everyone on who applied, we will certainly do so. What we definitely want to do is assemble everyone who's interested, including those who said they wanted to serve, to make sure we get your input. So Sue and our other reps are in a position to represent you. But again, interesting information in terms of this is what you thought from a representative sample of our membership. This poll goes out every Monday. I encourage you to take a quick look, vote if you have an interest in it. It does give us good information that we work with. So Sue, I'll stop and I'll hang there for a second in case you want to comment on the results, and then we'll kind of go into the work group information as well.
I want to say I am really not surprised at the results of the survey question. I think oftentimes we feel invited into the process, but don't feel like we're making any impact on that very same process. So, I understand this. I'm hoping though that this time they're getting more and more accustomed to listening to our voices. And of course, I think that is because of the collaborative approaches we've been taking across the state. So hopefully it will be much more successful than other groups have in the past. The reason why, I spoke up early to serve on this committee, and I want to go back to the potential legislation. Sometimes legislation can look really good on the surface, but if you haven't really done the work to support that legislation, and given thought to what it will look like if that new system comes into play, then it truly isn't worth the paper it's written on. And this was a big piece of it. CPS has been all over the place. Day services have been all over the place as more and more we look towards an inclusive model. But no one's done the hard lift of how those changes should occur, what they should look like. And as Patrick said, we can't use just one or two voices because we've all gone in different routes because we haven't had much guidance. So what Lark has created and what somebody else has created might look totally different. So it is very important to Patrick and I that our subcommittee at the TPA will really inform our voice at the state level. So I do want to say that we hope that everybody who wanted to serve on the bigger committee and more will join together at our TPA level to raise your voices and your concerns so that we can bring a full picture at the state level. Having sat on the committee for the support coordination, I do know that, the voices are heard and maybe in some way, shape, or form, we do influence what they are going to do. But it is so much better if we have the voices behind us. So it's not just your opinion, but it's the opinion of an entire group that exists and has power because of numbers. So,
I want to jump in just before I kind of move past the poll. I think these results that we just received through the polls are pretty interesting when you look at waiting lists and to the point of how much information is out there about waiting lists. So do you know how many adults are on the emergency waiting list in the county or counties you serve? 83% who voted said no. So they're not familiar with the numbers. 90% said no to, do you know the services needed? And I think you can now, I think, going forward, get the information. Hopefully, it was suspended for quite a long time. You couldn't even get the numbers. The numbers, I think, they're going to be fairly forthcoming about. So hopefully, we can bridge that. That's why we asked the final question. If you knew that, would knowing the services be helpful? 90% said yes. If we knew that, that would be helpful. So again, that's interesting information to me. Thank you for sharing that. And I really want to reflect that back to the points you were raising, Sue. And I think as we collect a group of interested members to talk about CPS recommendations, that is something I think that hopefully through supports coordination and through just mechanisms of the state to collect data. If you go back to that report, one of the things they do criticize is there's not really good data on the system. It's a lot of it's directed at workforce, but not all of it. And I think this is important, especially when the governor is publicly talking about eliminating the emergency waiting list. And there seems to be a bottleneck of information. What do these folks actually need? And a surprising number of people don't even get the numbers. So I think that has to be a connection within the system that we all work toward. Everybody should know that. Everybody should sort of have an understanding. If they can't share information, I'm not sure that they can't about individuals, but at least we need to have capacity in various parts of the state because these are the types of services that folks will need. Otherwise, I think we end up in a situation where we already seem to be, where people get their waivers, but they can't buy any services because that capacity doesn't exist. So I do think that's something that this work group can work toward. And we'll promise to get this scheduled certainly after the 4th of July holiday at this point, but very soon in the near future. Kristen advises me she has not finalized even the participant list yet. And I told her we'd be doing something after the 4th. She said that should be plenty of time for you to collect your group before she schedules the first meeting. She will be directly involved in that. She has shared with me also. So I think you'll have a direct line to Kristen when you're having those conversations, Sue. And I appreciate, as you said already, you want to collect information from all members here, and not just those of you who said you would serve on this. If you have a concern, a question, an idea, a thought, we've laid a lot of things out, but we certainly don't think of everything. So I really look forward to getting that scheduled, and you can watch for that. So maybe I'll go into, and I see
Patrick, we have a
question to the
question.
panelists. Yeah, I saw, I'll say this, Craig, and if I've missed it and you've got another one, let me know. I think I addressed this. This is a question to panelists about whether Governor Shapiro would sign the market index bill. I believe that that is what that is referring to. And I think I made a comment that that's our belief. Of course, we don't know what the governor, under the exact moment a bill might reach him. But I think being vocal, we've had conversations with his administration. The secretary has been more open about the concept than any secretary in the past. And I will say, as Kristen has been more receptive to that conversation, made sure we include the budget director in DHS in our communications. I will also say that we have regular meetings. They're called advocate updates with staff in the governor's office. And as soon as we had word that we had a bipartisan bill in the offing in the House, I made a point to advise the person who leads that. So I think we'll continue the communication. And as I also said earlier, in talking among the other associations, we have a belief this is the time to do it. And that includes with this governor, political aspirations possibly beyond the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania. So we really want to act in this legislative session, get this through. And I believe Governor Shapiro would be the best hope we've had in recent memory where I wouldn't have that question. Recent governors, I would not have been so sure, even if we were successful in the General Assembly. I'm more confident that Governor Shapiro would sign this legislation. But it's a good question to raise because it's not something we should neglect. We need to make sure that we're advocating across the board. Sure.
I think that the question was really meant for the Senate Bill 657. And if the governor is, if we know if the governor is in support of that.
That came about so quickly. That would have been a great question for David, and maybe that's where it was directed. I have no idea. I have an opinion that I don't want to express. It came to be so quickly. Anybody else that hasn't? David, I see you're still there. So if you have any information, please let us know.
Yeah, no, I don't have any information, but I think I would tend to lean that he would support this legislation, but I'm not sure yet. So I'd reserve judgment on that.
I'm sorry, David, did you say would or would not?
He would.
Okay. All right, so that's still hanging in the balance. As we said, that's been tabled. So anything else, Craig, before we kind of, we only have a few minutes and we'll wrap up on CPS here, unless there's other questions.
I think that's it for now.
Okay. And if you have another question, please post it to chat or Q&A, and we'll make sure we get to it. We know we're covering a lot of things in some depth here. Hopefully we'll give you good information. If you miss it on the meeting, the recording will be out there, and we'll post everything to the site as well as it's relevant. So next slide really gets into some of the things that I've already said. So maybe we won't hang here real long. I'll just briefly say, Sue, we shared the invite with the board, of which you're a board member, and then we subsequently put it out to our membership because we really didn't have an immediate 2 or 3 that wanted to step up, and then suddenly we got 20 plus. But this is verbatim from what Kristen put out to all the associations requesting, basically announcing they're rebooting this work group. And here's the language that was in that we've covered a couple of times. This has been in our correspondences asking for participation from our members on the work group. So you can see quickly what those relate to. The hub definition, I continue to hear things like, we're told that hubs need to be licensed if there's X number of people. Again, this gets into the applicability of the Chapter 2380 regulations, as clearly we've looked at in the proposed legislation 657. So quickly, if we can go to the next slide, I think that is where we really wanted to call out in the prep session yet to be scheduled sometime shortly after July 4th. We'll notify you. These are some thoughts and ideas, some exchanges I've had with members. Kristen and I spoke in really looking at what we would hope to accomplish, some of the feedback I had received, trying to give her some advance notice and warning, including financial. And she does not disagree, by the way. She's in no position to award us more money, of course, but understands the importance as you're looking at changes. You really have to look at corresponding financial and economic factors. So Sue, this is sort of the short list, and this is a short list I've shared with Kristen, kind of waiting to have some more dialogue, but I want to give you the chance here in our remaining minutes to kind of talk about what's important to you, either from this list or from your own experience.
Well, I want to go back to that concept of hubs because it actually comes out of the Bureau of Autism many, many years ago. And as it's evolving, what does it really mean? How are they going to define it in the world of day service providing as opposed to when it was part of the Bureau of Autism? What will those hubs really look like? Where will they occur? What will they entail? Who will they include? So there's a lot of questions around that, and a lot of I think good chances of creating situations that will better serve, especially individuals with autism. Also, we've gone down so many different roads, those of us who are day service providers. At Lark, we've integrated a lot of technology with artificial intelligence to allow our people to do complex work, which then leads to them moving into the community at the same time. So, they're not spending all of their time in Lark, they're spending some of the week at Lark and some of the week in the community working in jobs that are more complex. So, there's just, and then there's other providers who have invited in companies into their space that now run businesses utilizing their individuals that they are supporting. Also, I think very importantly, the complex needs, where parents are really reaching out who have individuals who are coming out of K-12 who have very complex needs. How do you support them in a day service model? What do you do with 2380? How do we change that up? How do we, if there's an emphasis on employment, how do we make that a reality for individuals with complex needs? And do we make it a reality? Do we create something very different for those individuals? So I think those are going to be some of the areas of interest from this group in trying to define and invent and create something that really will facilitate. And then when you get down to licensing, what does licensing look like? It's even now when you license a Prevoke, are you going to license a hub the same way you license 2380? Or are you going to license it like 2390s? Like, what do you actually think that we need in that area? And I think a lot of our people have some really, really good ideas. By the same token, what challenges are we facing if we're not financially backed in most of these models and most of these creative ideas? If we can't charge a unit of service for it, how do we economically afford to implement any of these potential programs? Right.
Yeah, so I agree with you completely. I'm just so glad we'll have the opportunity to sort of get a group together. Certainly we'll ask you and hopefully two additional leads representing us. But we'll work with you and the other leads as well, Sue, so we can make sure you guys are there participating and opening up to full membership. And we'll look forward to having a robust discussion, hopefully with a large group of members. So thank you, Sue. I want to quickly get to just the last couple of slides briefly because I want to make a correction. So supports coordination, I just briefly want to say, we do intend to do something similar with supports coordination among AEs, supports coordinators. Supports coordination affects everything, as we've touched upon a little bit here during this meeting. So you can look for that in the near future as well. Next slide, Craig. This is a slide from last month. And since the review process, if you go next slide, we were reporting, we may have been underreporting numbers. I spoke with Kristen to have her kind of check this because I was hearing there were not that many added since the last time we reported, but it is 7 more than we reported at our meeting a month ago. So 17.2% of individuals to about 5.3% of residential providers. So the numbers are up. There's some data there you can look at after the meeting. You can see that there were 59 who applied, about 23 of 59 who applied for a select or clinically enhanced tier received. And then next slide, just a final reminder, join us if you can. Come in person if you can. It's going to be a great event. Thanks to our sponsors, first and foremost. Thanks to ODP, Kristen, for bringing her leadership team, spending the day with us. More to come on that. Last slide. Thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at the conference one way or another. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great weekend. Great 4th of July holiday coming up as well.